Peggy Nash. How wonderful.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Peggy. I'm going to ask Kelly Bevan to introduce you, if that's okay.
Great.
I've just got to figure out how to get to my notes. Apologies. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I was asked to say a few words to introduce our guest speaker, Peggy Nash. I first want to thank Peggy for taking the time to speak with us today. I could not think of a better person to share time with during Women's History Month than Peggy Nash, a force in both the labor movement and Canadian politics. In May of 2022, Peggy Nash released her book titled Women Winning Office, an Activist Guide to Getting Elected. According to Dr. Pamela Swigeman, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Toronto Metropolitan University, this book is a highly accessible comment on women's leadership, power, and social change in a society fraught with inequalities. Nash cleverly balances political critique with personal optimism for all groups of women in Canada. It definitely isn't a surprise that her book has been so well received, given her long, successful, and impressive career in labor and politics. Peggy Nash is perfectly positioned to provide guidance to women seeking political office. Prior to politics, Peggy worked as a union activist for the Canadian Airline Employees Association, which went on to merge with the Canadian Auto Workers, now Unifor. Working as a woman union activist within the transportation and aerospace industry must surely have presented Peggy with challenges and barriers. However, Peggy did not allow that to stop her, and as senior labor negotiator, she was the first woman negotiator responsible for a major North American contract with a Detroit auto company when she negotiated the 2005 Ford Canada contract. With Peggy's experience in and dedication to labor, it is no surprise that when she decided to enter into politics, she ran as an NDP candidate. She was first elected as MP for Parkdale High Park in 2006 and again in 2011. She has also served as a federal NDP's president. The work she did while in office is lengthy, but of note is introducing a bill to reinstate a national minimum wage of $10, as well as the once-in-a-lifetime legislation to reunite new Canadians with their families, advocating for water sustainability, transit, and several consumer issues impacting working Canadians, such as reducing credit card interest rates, ATM fees, and payday lender interest rates. Her work in making childcare issues a public priority for advancing women's causes in politics, as well as her involvement with founding Equal Voice, an all-party organization which advocates for the election of more women in Canada, was recognized in 2009 when she was awarded the YWCA Toronto Women of Distinction Award in the labor category. Currently, Peggy is senior advisor to the Dean of Arts and the Ted Rogers School of Management Center for Labor Management Relations, as well as a board member of the Broadbent Institute. Thank you, merci, and miigwech. I will now turn the mic over to Peggy Nash.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And good evening, everyone. I hope my connection holds up here. The wind outside is quite wild. I don't know what it's like in Owen Sound, but it's a pleasure to join you this evening. And boy, hearing about the $10 minimum wage, I remember talking with workers and having them tell me, oh, if only we could make $10 an hour. Now I think if only people could make $30 an hour, they could probably pay their grocery bills. So what I thought I would do this evening is speak for a bit. I've chosen 3 topics to speak about, and then we'll open it up for questions if that's okay. But I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and congratulations to all of you for standing up for social democracy in the Owen Sound area. I know that it can be tough in an area that where people see the world in more conservative ways, but thank you for standing up for a fair, less unequal society for everyone. Tonight, I want to talk about 3 things. First of all, corporate greedflation. Secondly, billionaire tax avoidance. And lastly, the need for the left to organize, because that ultimately is how we win. So first of all, in terms of greedflation by corporations, I think a lot of people right now are very angry about what feels like their shrinking income and the increasing inflation. Wages are lagging, and for people on fixed incomes, it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet. And the way the Bank of Canada is going by hiking interest rates, which is the traditional way to combat inflation, assuming that the cause of inflation is rising wages and workers demanding too much, is just adding to the problem. It's the wrong cause right now. It's not rising wages that is increasing prices, and it's the wrong solution. Prices have been rising because companies have been profiteering during the pandemic and since the pandemic. What affects everyone is the food retailing and food manufacturing sector, whose profits have been astronomical, but they're not alone. There's about 13 other sectors that have profited dramatically from the pandemic and other disruptions, like the war in Ukraine. The leading culprits or other leading culprits include the petroleum industry, whose profits rose over 1,000% compared to 2019. The banking sector, mining, real estate, building materials, and new car sales. So all of these sectors, companies have really kind of reached in with both hands and grabbed a much bigger share of the wealth than they were entitled to. But food prices, I think, really make people feel the pinch more than anything. Food retailers have taken advantage of the pandemic, and they've extracted more from workers by clawing back the $2 increase they gave workers, but they've also severely impacted consumers. And their profits have clearly contributed to inflation and should be challenged with excess profit taxes, stronger competition rules, and better labor standards. But our legitimate anger at the supermarkets should be just the start of a bigger conversation about the power of corporations to charge whatever the market will bear, even in a social and economic emergency. The enormous profits captured by companies in all these sectors are undermining the standard of living of most Canadians. They're spurring inflation, and now they're sparking a really myopic counter-reaction by the Bank of Canada. And the reaction of the Bank of Canada in hiking interest rates time and time again may well lead us into a recession. So this is the last thing that we need after the chaos of the last few years. When really the issue is the opportunism and the greed of these companies that have created the inflation in the first place. So regulating corporate grocery chains and other very profitable corporations more generally needs to go hand in hand with the bigger issue of tax justice. And that brings me to my second topic about billionaire tax avoidance and why tax justice matters now. Because I think we're at a critical juncture for tax justice advocacy. As a former opposition finance critic, I got the finance committee to study taxation levels, but what banks and other corporations will argue is that they simply follow the rules. Yes, they may have aggressive tax avoidance strategies, but they comply with the law. So in my view, it's time to change the law. We've seen the rise in billionaires and their fortunes alongside the sharp rise of poverty for the many. And that alone is proof that tax policies of our governments are failing in their essential role, which should be to redistribute wealth, to promote equity, and to mobilize public dollars, public finance to promote our social well-being. So the current situation, current tax regime, represents political choices. Every budget is really choices, political choices that governments make. And yet these choices continue to benefit a small but incredibly influential elite. And what do I mean by that? Well, for the last several years, before the pandemic, we've had austerity, that is cutting back on government spending, and an over-reliance on taxes based on consumption, like the GST. But we've also seen tax cuts to corporations and declining top tax rates, so the people at the top paying less and less, and very weak or non-existent wealth taxes. And this is not just in Canada. Lax tax systems are a global problem. We've also seen rapid growth in very opaque or unregulated offshore wealth. The amount of money that's sloshing around the world that's hidden in tax havens and hidden in tax vehicles, tax avoidance vehicles around the world. And this can be completely legitimately created profits, or it could be the result of financial crimes. But because of the opaqueness of the international banking sector, we can't always even tell the difference. But throughout it all, those with great wealth, individuals and corporations, have been able to sidestep a lot of their tax obligations and hoard an increasingly big amount of their wealth, while people around the world, millions of people, struggle to make ends meet. They've seen the cost of living increase. Wages have stagnated for many years. All the while, there's growing evidence of climate disasters taking place, and the weakened ability of governments to provide relief, to take effective action. I mean, I'm here in the city of Toronto, and it breaks my heart to see our crumbling transit system and crumbling infrastructure in various parts of the city. And low-income people and average people, but especially low-income people, pay the price. And I would argue especially women pay the price, because they are paid generally less than men. They disproportionately have to personally make up for the social services and benefits that we don't have. I've been somebody who's been advocating for childcare for decades. And in the absence of affordable childcare, family members, especially women, take up the slack. So looking at putting some specifics to these numbers, we know that globally, billionaires increased their wealth in the first year of the pandemic by 54%. 54%. In Canada, the top 47 billionaires, I didn't even know we had that many, but the top 47 billionaires increased their wealth by $78 billion. Approximately 5.5 million people lost their jobs due to COVID-19 during the pandemic. And the bottom 40% of Canadians own only 1.2% of all wealth in Canada. So the bottom 40%, 4 in 10 Canadians own only 1.2% of the wealth of Canada. Now, if the wealthy, those with, say, over 20 million, surely they can get along, scrape by with $20 million, a 1% tax on wealth over $20 million would raise another $10 billion in the first year alone. So that's money that we could put to social programs, to fixing infrastructure, to helping all of us live a better life. The fact is, some have gotten billions of dollars richer during the pandemic. They've benefited from a global health and economic crisis. And it's clear that the current tax system is simply not working. So more than ever, we need a concrete plan that helps all of us recover from the pandemic and to ensure that our society is on a stronger footing. So I'm a member of Canadians for Tax Fairness, and we're advocating a wealth tax so that the very richest are paying at least a little more to help relieve the burden on everyone else. We're also calling for an excess profit tax so that companies and individuals who've been benefiting from the pandemic, profiteering off the recovery, are paying their fair share. And we're also advocating closing tax loopholes so that the most wealthy can't just skim their money out of the public purse. So a comprehensive, progressive taxation policy would see wealth taxes at a critical element. So that's not somebody who's got like their modest house or a regular middle-class income. We're talking about people at the very, very top who can most afford to pay their fair share, because we need that income to finance society, to make it fair for everyone. When we don't, as is the situation now, these lost public revenues from untaxed wealth is a missed opportunity for governments to invest in our public services. And when people evade taxes, the rest of us either have to pay more or we lose access to the provision of critical social services. So taxing wealth is critical for reducing inequalities and ensuring that wealth created by workers, by working people across the country and around the world, is fairly shared rather than unfairly hoarded by a few at the top. So I would argue that taxing the rich offers the greatest potential to also strengthen democracy by building back the trust that our institutions can work for us. Because I know I hear it time and time again, I'm paying more taxes and the services are declining. That's a recipe for undermining our democracy and for eroding trust in a public shared project. So we need democracy. We need our society to work for all of us. When I hear Pierre Poilievre say everything is broken, I know he has no plan to fix the problem, that what he's going to do will make the problem worse. I've never heard him address the issue of billionaires or corporate profits or private wealth undermining our public wealth, our services, or our democracy. He's harnessing the anger people feel justifiably for the poor benefits and the lack of trust that many people are feeling right now. But he isn't advocating for a solution that actually makes us stronger together. I'm a feminist, and I know that to defend women's rights, we need to bridge gender gaps in our society so that women are paid fairly, so that women have equal access to jobs and to the benefits of society. But we also have to create the environmental and the economic transformation that we need. And to do all of this, we urgently need progressive taxation, more progressive taxation by taxing the rich. So to improve progressivity in our tax system, we should expand the scope of wealth taxes. The US has recently introduced a minimum 15% on corporate profits, book profits, the profits that they tell their shareholders they're making, not the profits they say on their income tax after they've deducted all the loopholes. Studies have shown that we are now losing about $10 billion a year by not having a similar 15% minimum tax. And we also need to take appropriate measures to ensure that we're combating illicit financial transactions resulting from tax avoidance and tax evasion. And a key way to do this is through the establishment of what's called a beneficial ownership register. This is something that that shows everyone, public, everyone internationally, who actually owns companies, who actually owns wealth, rather than hiding behind numbered companies or international corporate structures that hide the true owners of corporate wealth. And good news on this front, with pressure from the NDP, the Liberals have just introduced a bill for public beneficial ownership registry. So this will make it harder for people to dodge taxes, wealthy tax dodgers. It'll be harder for corrupt business people or oligarchs to hide their assets in Canada. So this transparency will help make sure people pay their fair share of taxes, and it will begin to put a stop to money laundering, which is a huge problem in Canada, especially with real estate speculation. So if we can help reduce or eliminate real estate speculation from criminal activity, that'll make it easier for Canadians to find a home that they can afford. So this is important. The NDP has used, there may be questions about the NDP supply and confidence agreement, but the NDP used this agreement to force the Liberals to bring in this bill. They had said they were going to bring it in and then dragged their feet. So it's important that this is now something that's going to happen. So lastly, I just want to talk briefly about the need for the left to organize, because I know that you are members of the NDP and you're active in the NDP because you're informed, because you care, and you want to see things change. And it's frustrating that, and I know because I've knocked on many thousands and thousands of doors and talked to so many people, that some people either really can't be bothered, don't have time, aren't interested, and or just somehow are down the path of information that seems contrary to common sense or to the logic of building a better society. So I am convinced, and I talk a lot about this in my book, Women Winning Office, that the way for us to win, and it's in my experience, the way that that helped us win locally in an area where the NDP had never won before federally, was just by knocking on doors and talking to people, or going where people are at. If they're at the hockey rink, or they're at the school baseball game, or wherever. Because to make the changes we want, we need to connect with our friends and neighbors, and offer them, ultimately, not try to browbeat them, but offer them information that can help improve our lives. But this starts with listening, really hearing what's on people's minds, and it might be things you disagree with. But I found what helped in my area was taking up a petition on something that was likely very popular. So right now it could be a petition to force grocery companies to limit their profits to a certain percentage. There's petitions floating around on this, or it could be something that's an issue locally. I don't know, building a new arena, getting a swimming pool open, something local. But it starts with talking to people and listening to what's on their mind, and then offering them something that can win their support, and using that as a way to build a relationship with them. I find that what doesn't work is just going door to door, and it's hard during an election because you want them to support your party. But in between elections, I find just trying to build relationships with people as opposed to talking party politics, connecting with them on issues, is the way to build relationships. Talking about your personal situation, linking it to their situation, and eventually offering them the opportunity to get involved, to do something about an issue they care about. So come to a meeting about grocery prices, or come and hear some progressive person, an economist, or someone interesting to come and who's coming to speak, try to get some neighbors to come on out. And, you know, people don't change their minds or their political persuasions overnight. Sometimes it can take a long, long time. But I find that building those relationships and gently being there with information can really make a difference. I was just at an event listening to the person who was the lead organizer of the Staten Island Amazon organizing drive that was successful in Staten Island. And he was saying it took a long time of him in a tent across the street from the Amazon facility, because a lot of people didn't want to talk to him when he first came out. And he was there every day, he leafleted, and he said eventually the company would do something that made them mad. And when they were ready, he was there. And I would argue that, I don't know if it's right now, but people are getting mad. And rather than Pierre Poilievre being there, Doug Ford being there, I'd rather that we were there, ready to receive their anger and offer them some constructive solutions that they can do something about. That to me makes sense. It's the only way to organize that I know. And I know in Owen Sound that there are a lot of progressive people who might not know it yet, but I think they could be persuaded to support the NDP in greater numbers than they already have been. And I know that takes a lot of work, and it is hard, time-consuming work, but I know that you're up for it. And I just want to thank you for listening to me tonight, and I'm open to any questions or comments or disagreements that you may have. So over to you.
So if anyone has any questions for Peggy, if you have a moment to either put your hands up or to make a note or put something in the chat, and Sharon will keep an eye.
I see Michael Volpe there. Hi, Michael.
Hello, how are you?
I am well, thanks. Last time I saw you, I think, was in Toronto at the
In
university.
In Royal Ontario Museum Coffee Shop.
Right. Now you're living in God's country.
Absolutely. God's people.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Peggy?
I did send a question through to Shannon.
Okay.
I do have it here, Ray. Do you want me to take it away?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Ray's question, hello, everybody, I'm back. Ray's question, Ray, if I may summarize a little bit here for you, Peggy, is about how to proceed as a good New Democrat in a conservative weighted riding. So a riding that is deep blue or conservative heavy. Ray is looking for your best advice on how to proceed and what to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I guess I started speaking about that at the end of my remarks. And
Yes, but if I can intercede, Shannon
Sure.
did edit out a fair little bit. I had it down there that we consider in the times of the elections, Toronto and Ottawa spend their time in places that already have MPs and MPPs rather than, and Metro Toronto, the GTA, rather than going into areas that need the assistance, that could use the help. And in today's society, it's been proven that you can do more to increase your popularity by dealing with the poorest of the areas rather than building from the top. Go ahead.
okay. Well, you know, I agree with that. I think when I first ran, I was really motivated to try to connect with people who weren't voting. And I'm not saying people aren't voting in Owen Sound, but I went out to try to connect with the people who were fed up and didn't think anybody was going to help them or make a difference. And I went out and tried to build my support there. So I agree with you in the sense that you can never write people off. You know, I think some of us in Ontario tend to write off Alberta, but I know that there's, you know, people are people everywhere. They care about a lot of the same things, and you can never write anybody off. But I also think that the NDP as a party can't replace the work of individuals in a community who know their friends and neighbors, who know their community, and who build those relationships and bring in new people into the discussion. So you know, in a federal campaign, yeah, in our area, Jagmeet Singh might roll in with his campaign bus, or when I was running, Jack Layton might roll up in a campaign bus. That's a boost to the party activists. I'm not sure it persuades people to vote for you. What persuades people to vote for you are the people you know who trust you, your family members, your friends, the relationships you've built up over the years. I know when I was running for oh, my dog has just joined us. I know when I was running for office, I'd knock on doors and people would say, oh yeah, my son played sports with your son, or they were at the same school. Those relationships are, to me, the most important aspect of organizing. So I agree with you, Ray, that the party needs to not just be focused on urban centers. It needs to cast a wider net, but nothing replaces the work that you do in building support for the party.
Thank you, Peggy. We have another question here from Noreen and Garth. It says, how do marketing boards figure into the equation of price increases? Are the boards equal in their transparency?
That's a good question. I'm a supporter of marketing boards in general because they prevent the boom bust situation for producers, whether it's poultry or eggs or dairy, whatever. And they were generated, it's my understanding, the genesis of them was that, you know, in good times, you could make a lot of money, but in bad times, people go out of business, they lose their farms. And so what the marketing boards do is tend to maintain more stability and yes, in some cases, I guess higher prices, because if all our family farms just closed up shop, we could probably import milk or eggs or whatever cheaper from the US, but that destroys a way of life. And personally, I'd rather get my dairy and poultry, etc., locally. So it helps farmers stabilize their incomes, and it might limit their prices during the best times. It might save them during bad times. How transparent they are, that I do not know. If any of you are familiar with that, maybe you could jump in and answer that part of the question. I thought I saw Michael Falpy with a hand up at one point. Did I scare you away?
No, I'm here. I want to know your thoughts on how well the partnership with the NDP and the Liberals has worked, and whether you think that enough information about it has got out to the public, and so the public is seeing that this is actually a worthwhile thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's your assessment of it?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about it, I struggled with it. And the reason I struggled with it, you folks, it's more of a conservative NDP split, I guess, up there. In our area, it's kind of liberal. It's liberal NDP. And so the thought of doing a deal with the Liberals, I thought, oh God, you know, how do we run against Liberals if we're joining forces with them? But then I thought about it, you know, I'm a big proponent of proportional representation. And that's what proportional representation is. You work with other parties to get things done in Parliament. It promotes more cooperation between parties, and that's what this agreement is about. People have said, well, in this agreement, why didn't the NDP get proportional representation? Why didn't they get, I don't know, a guaranteed family physician for every Canadian? Why didn't you get this? Why didn't you get that? I'm a former negotiator, and what I know is you can only get as much as the other side was willing to give. In other words, if proportional representation was never on the table, it doesn't matter how long you hold out for it, you're not going to get it. I mean, there's no question that the Liberals do not want proportional representation. I think, if you look back into how we got Medicare and how we got CPP, it was when you had a Liberal minority government and the NDP used its power to exert that pressure on a minority government. And the result was spectacular for Canadians. Now, it'll be up to, the Liberals aren't going to give the NDP credit for anything, that's for sure. And Pierre Poilievre lit his hair on fire when the NDP, well, I guess it was he the leader at that point? I don't remember. But anyway, Conservatives hate it because it cuts them out of the picture. But I would argue that what it does is keep the NDP in the picture, because people are always speculating. Is the NDP going to get what it wants on dental care, on this, on that? Will the NDP bring the government down on the issue of a public inquiry on Chinese state involvement in elections? So it keeps the NDP involved as part of the equation. As Jack Layton used to say, the worst thing for the NDP is to just be ignored. And it's very easy when you have that two-party horse race for the NDP to be ignored. And so I think one achievement with the agreement has been that the NDP has not been ignored. We do have the beginnings of a dental plan, and there's lots of criticism about it. If we had an NDP government, they might bring it in differently. They would bring it in differently. But the next tranche of that, the next phase is going to come in this year. And that's going to make a difference for people. And I think the NDP has held the Liberals' feet to the fire around childcare. Again, the NDP would do it very differently. It wouldn't have given such leeway to private corporations in the childcare field. So I guess, again, it's my background as a negotiator that I would rather make some progress than make no progress and try to be pure about it. Is there enough information out about why the NDP made this agreement and the benefits of it? I think you have a good point there. I think a lot of people don't necessarily fully see it. They think it's a coalition, or that the NDP has more power than it actually does. The NDP is not in cabinet. It's basically just saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, we're not going to vote against you and have an election. And I don't know, when they did this, I don't think anybody was clamoring for an election. So I think, when you're the fourth party, which the NDP is right now, like if you go to the House of Commons, where I was just there a couple of weeks ago, you're like a tiny little rump group in this parliament. We're fourth. To use that power to be able to carve out the role that the party is, I think is important. There wouldn't be a public inquiry right now about the interference in Canadian elections if the NDP hadn't forced it. So, you know, we wouldn't get the transparency around beneficial ownership that I described in my remarks without the NDP forcing it. That gives, it's carving out as much power as you can get when you really don't have a lot of cards in your hand.
Thank you.
With your experience in Ottawa,
No, sorry, Ray. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
So sorry to cut you off. We have, I don't want to be rude, but we have 3 other people who haven't had a chance to ask a question yet. Is it okay if I just, okay, thank you. We have Chris, Matt, and Eric. So Peggy, we're presenting you with our best. Chris, Matt, and Eric, right up. Chris, you start.
Oh, so my question, at least as I wrote it, is although I think you've sort of already begun to address this in your previous answer. But I was wondering, do you think the NDP needs to adopt more radical policy positions in order to facilitate the kind of organization and mobilization of voters who are disappointed with modern neoliberalism?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this because on the one hand, I mean, I was rooting for Bernie Sanders in the US, and I'm a big fan of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think, you know, conservatives have gotten very radical, especially in, they've gotten a little crazy in the US, quite crazy. But I think international capital has been quite radical in their economic policies, in rolling back the kind of social accords of the post-war period. And so part of me is really frustrated with kind of the, you know, I think of the kind of Blairite policies of New Labour in that period. And so I do feel that we need to be firmer and clearer and I mean, call it more radical in our approach. And yet always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about, you know, I spent a lot of time tonight talking about go talk to your friends and neighbors and think about your friends and neighbors and what are they saying and how would they react? And I always think about that. And I think it depends. It's not only what you say, but how you say it. And so I don't think people respond well to kind of far left political rhetoric. I do think if you're talking about specific issues, so for example, corporate wealth or billionaire wealth and the need for greater transparency, the need for stronger tax measures. I think some of those things can be quite radical and people can hear it and support it if it's specific and free of jargon and rhetoric. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but that's, I always think, you know, how will the neighbors react? And I think they might react quite well, given how angry a lot of people are right now.
Yeah, so if I can just, I'll be very quick just to follow that up, because that is what I'm talking about. So for example, the 1% increase in taxes on the wealthy, right? To me, that's a good idea, but say, for example, a 100% marginal tax rate over $10 million, to me, that's a better idea. And I think that my learning of history, at least, is that in periods of crisis, people want solutions that are direct, clear, simple, and radical. And they tend to either choose radical conservatism, which results in disaster, or radical leftism, which improves things. So that's why I'm wondering if maybe when we get into kind of these more moderate, so to speak, policies if we lose people because they're complicated and because they don't seem to have a direct material impact on their lives. Whereas if we can offer simple, immediate solutions that directly address the crisis and the anger that they're feeling, that's not only more enticing, but also more effective. Or could that shut down negotiation?
Well, I mean, I think I completely agree with you. If it gets the nod test of your neighbors, then go for it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I listen to Ocasio-Cortez, who will have very radical solutions. Now, I don't know how that would play in Alabama or Georgia or Texas, but it sure works for her where she lives. And, you know, and you can say a lot of things or that make sense that may seem radical, but meet the nod test. And sometimes you throw in a little bit of humor, and that helps as well.
Thanks, Peggy. We have Matt, who is not new to the NDP, but new to Bruce Grey Owen Sound, followed by Eric. And after these next two questions, I'll just check into you in with you about timing and scheduling and how we're doing. So two more, and then we'll see how things are going.
Well, Peggy, I moved up here from the Davenport riding where I worked on Andrew Cash's campaign, Jonah Shine's campaign, like from the early, you know, and I see 18 people. I'm like, we got enough food in. So my question to you is about campaigning, because a lot of people think it happens when the writ drops. And what I learned in Davenport, I'm sure you can talk about, and your experience in High Park, it's the amount of work that gets put in prior to the writ drop, and how, in my opinion, it's way more important. So if you could touch on that.
Yeah, if you wait until the election is called, your opponents are already way down the road. They've left you in the dust already. So, you know, the standard thinking is the next campaign starts the day after the last campaign. And I know certainly, and Andrew and I were a tag team on this, but I know whenever I was back from Ottawa, and certainly when the house was down for the summer, I'd be out most days of the week knocking on doors, and just my standard line was, you know, I introduce myself and I'd say, I'm just checking in to see what's on your mind. What issues have you got? And it's, you know, some people say, blech, I don't want to talk to you. But most people really are pleased that someone wants to listen to them. And, you know, you don't have to agree with everything, but just making that connection. And, you know, the number of people, and Matt, you would know this, that some people would say, gee, nobody's ever asked me before. Nobody's knocked on my door. I'll support you. Now, that doesn't take the place of, you know, political analysis or a good platform or anything, but you know, those relationships with people are the foundation of organizing. And yeah, you've got to do that work long in advance. And you know, every time I would knock on a door, and it's people of all ages, you know, every so often you get someone who says, yeah, I really support you. I like what you're doing, or I support the NDP. I, you know, never miss an opportunity to say, well, would you like to get involved? Here's an opportunity. And it could be something as little as signing a petition, could be coming to a meeting. It could be dropping by an office. It could, you know, there's a whole scale of things, but offering people the opportunity to act on things that they believe in is a real gift. I don't think we should ever be shy about asking people to get involved. And then you're building your team, building your numbers, and people get a chance to develop their skills and become leaders, to display their own leadership skills. So to me, you know, people say, what are you most proud of in politics? I am most proud of the organizing that we did and the people that we inspired to get involved. And I see people today who had never been political, who today are running campaigns or have taken staff positions with elected officials, or, you know, some have gone on to really big things. So when you're asking someone to get involved, you're not asking them to do you a favor. It's mutual. You're offering them a chance to get involved, to grow, to be part of democracy. That's a really big deal. So I wouldn't wait until an election or people say, you're just here for votes. You need to build those relationships ahead of time. So thank you for that question.
Eric Earl, you're up next.
Thanks. So I was talking with a local builder last night. He's concerned about the rising cost of building, and several of his projects are on hold, including like much needed housing in our area, which is a big concern. And what he informed me of was that the reason for these holds is the rising cost of building materials. And it can be a really big problem while a project is progressing if the costs increase, because it can make this happen, basically put stuff on hold. So how can this be addressed?
What does your builder friend say in terms of what he would like to see?
I didn't inquire further, but
Yeah,
I think
I mean, he likely knows what the solutions are. I mean, it's not my area of expertise, whether it's, you know, something like a clause in the building contract that allows for a dramatic increase in building materials. But if there's a particular bottleneck somewhere, for example, with, I don't know, imported materials, or whether it's, I don't know, rising cost of lumber, or
it was associated with
Pardon me?
inflation.
Yeah.
I believe it was associated with inflation. So
So he's facing the kind of squeeze that most people are facing, with their incomes not rising to meet the cost. And, you know, maybe that's an opportunity to, it doesn't solve his problem specifically, and he may have ideas about how to solve his problem, but you know, I was talking earlier about these 15 sectors that have really been profiteering during and since the pandemic. I mean, just in terms of laying blame, that may be something that is helpful, so that he doesn't think, well, the whole issue is greedy workers trying to grab too much, because quite frankly, workers have been falling behind and not keeping up with inflation. But that might be an opportunity to kind of make that connection. But I'd be interested to know what his ideas are in terms of identifying the source of the problem in the building sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as I said, I think he thought it was a lot to do with building costs. I just thought it was an important thing to address. A large part of our workforce is involved in construction in this area, and you know, just with LaUna's support of conservatism in the last election, it'd be nice to win back a consolidated sort of workforce, that would, it seemed like they left the rest of labor, and
yeah,
so,
LaUna is the laborers union.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they really are trying to look for where their bread is being buttered, and with these rising costs of building materials, they are concerned about whether they're working tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you know, again, I would argue maybe a way to ally with them is to say, listen, here's the real cost of why these prices are going up so dramatically. There's trying to think who's got good information on this. Jim Stanford at the Center for Future Work has done really good work on looking at who's been profiting from the pandemic and post-pandemic period. And so there's concrete information that others might be interested in getting. And I mean, I know how tight housing is in the Owen Sound area, and building new housing is important, and it's also a big source of jobs. So if people are being prevented from building because of the connection between oil and gas profits, grocery profits, you know, I think there's a potential to build common cause there.
Thank you.
Have we answered all the questions?
I think we've mostly covered them. We have more questions than we have time. That's always the case. But I understand we're giving the last word to Michael Valpy tonight.
Oh.
So, Michael,
Shannon, I want to just get that the name. You said Jim Stanford, and what association was he involved with?
Yeah, thanks. It's Jim Stanford, Stanford.
Okay.
And he's at the Center for Future Work. So they're based in Vancouver and Australia, Melbourne or Sydney. They've got 2 offices. And Jim is an economist, a left economist, and yeah, anything he writes about, you can take it to the bank, because he's smart. He's an expert witness for all kinds of things, and he's yeah, I use his stuff. I rip off his stuff regularly, and he's glad to have other people do it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
He's also a really nice guy too.
Yeah, and funny.
And funny.
Well, thanks for all those great questions. Appreciate it.
Well, Peggy, Shannon, am I on?
you're on, good sir.
Yeah, good.
All you.
Peggy, you're really easy to thank. And listening to you speak tonight has confirmed in my mind that throughout your public life, you and Ed Broadbent have been the reasons why I belong to this party. You've been the model of a Canada that I would like to be myself, and the model of women in public life that I would hope my daughter would emulate, and which she is certainly trying to do. You've done so many things in your life as a parliamentarian that have made me proud of you and the work you've done for the country. You halted the sale of the iconic Canadarm and RadarSat-2 to an American company, which would have devastated the Canadian aerospace industry. You worked to strengthen Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic. You've been a defender of childcare, of decent wages and decent working conditions, and a decent and more equal life for all of our fellow Canadians. And tonight you've spoken to the pain that so many of your fellow Canadians, citizens, are experiencing. You've spoken out on you've spoken in defense of care for your for our Canadian society. You've spoken out against greedflation and the companies that are profiteering. In your lovely phrase, companies that are reaching in with both hands. And something you said to me struck a bell, that you said that people are getting mad, and I hope so. And that's no more sensitive an area than in the billionaire tax avoidance that's walking hand in hand with inflation. And it's interesting, Biden was just here in Canada yesterday and the day before, and he's bringing in a wealth tax, and it has immense popularity in the US. There have been, the polling that's been done on it in Canada indicates that it's also has immense popularity in Canada. That you gave the statistics in your talk that most Canadians, or many Canadians, are very much aware of how much revenue would be accumulated if there was a wealth tax that could go towards the inequalities that we have in services, the short changes of services. And so Biden was here talking about, not talking about it, but he's certainly the model of it. And we don't see any sign that this is high in the agenda of Justin Trudeau. And what we are going through, and what again you mentioned, is that it should be the start of a bigger conversation. And it should be what we as members of the NDP should be fighting for a more just and equal life. And so thank you. Thank you for bringing us that message. Thank you so much for the message of all the things that you brought to us tonight. And please come again soon. You were just wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to all of you. It's a pleasure. And I was in Owen Sound last summer speaking, and I very much enjoyed it, and I will definitely show up again. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.